One of our fundamental assumptions about what television is like, one of our fundamental beliefs about its characteristics, is that television is polysemic. And that literally means there are many meanings in television, many meanings available, whether we are talking about looking at one particular episode or one event in one series, or especially across television. It is polysemic. Now, that may be. However, that does not mean that we think that it is meaningless because there's so much meaning. And in particular, when we're looking at a single example of television, a particular episode, a particular scene, we need to think about how there is structure to the polysemy. This quality of television is structured polysemy. There we have the key critical term. Here is a key critical term that we use to think about how there can be meaning created in television. So the idea with structured polysemy is that there is an organization to the variety of ways we might make sense of what we see on TV, in terms of what happens in a narrative, but also the way that that thing is produced, the theatrical elements, the filmic elements, and so on. This term, structured polysemy, comes from a very important cultural theorist named Stuart Hall, who actually wrote about lots of different things, but he also particularly wrote about television. And in this case, he said, the thing about television is we need to consider that meanings are produced at least twice, and really more than twice. But we can split the times in which meaning is produced, especially into two different categories. First, when it is encoded on the production end. Television becomes meaningful, it is encoded, it becomes meaningful when it is produced, and when it is decoded by viewers, when they see it. That is what we call reception, the reception end. Encoding on the production, decoding on the reception end. His article was actually called Encoding, Decoding. The thing for us, though, as informed television scholars, is that we know when something in television is encoded on the production end, there are actually a lot of different things going on, right? There's a lot of different people involved. There are a lot of different creative choices that are made that have an effect on how television becomes meaningful. So really, when we talk about encoding on the production end, we're thinking about pre-production, production, post-production. What stories even get told? How do those stories get written? What do characters say? What are they dressed up like? How is an episode edited together? Like, all those different aspects of the production processes end up encoding meaning in TV. So it's not adequate to say that there's a single person, like a writer or director or producer, who ultimately decides what television means. There are a lot of different creative individuals involved. And you'll remember just a couple of units back, I talked about the Cultural Forum and the idea that creative people working in television are bricoleurs who are building and putting these different pieces together. Well, not only are they doing that, but they're working with other people, right? There's more than one person building that wall or art or house or whatever it might be. So in television, when we're thinking about modes of production and we're thinking about what it all means, we're thinking about all these different elements of production that encode meaning in that text, which then ultimately is made sense by audiences who decode it. And yes, of course, audiences make sense of things in different ways. We all have our own little decoder ring that we've created throughout our lives from our experiences and our education and our family and friends and everything that we've done, and all the television that we watched, right? So your television is not the same as my television. Even if we watch the same programs, we make sense of it in different ways. So there you have it, structured polysemy. The task for us as television critics is to map out that structure. How is it that some meanings are encouraged, are emphasized, and others are not, are submerged, or put away, or How is it, in other words, that we're encouraged to make sense of television in a particular way versus others? We as critics can look at TV and think about that, especially knowing what we know about how television gets produced. Now, this gets us to the question of, what is a TV show about anyway? What is it we're looking at when we're trying to deduce meaning? Well, so far we've kind of concentrated on the level of narrative and what happens. But the truth is, in the production of TV, there are especially lots of different chances for communicating in ways that aren't just about what people say or what happens to them. So this brings us to some terms that come from literary approaches to understanding culture. One, the motif. Motif refers to recurring elements within content, within the style, decisions that come back and we see repeatedly, that might not be dealt with overtly by someone pointing them out or talking about them, but because they're used repetitively, they make an impression on us. And these are especially useful in terms of creating this mysterious thing, the theme. Theme is all about those deeper connections within the narrative. What is it that unites the various different events that take place? Often in television today, we have themes that are unique to particular episodes of shows. That's one of the kinds of closures that we can have, even if a story continues from one episode to the next. The themes and the motifs might be completed within a particular episode. We're going to look at some examples and talk about them to better understand this here very quickly. But the idea is that with television, we're dealing, yes, with a text, but there's also a subtext. There's just what is beneath the surface that's still there, that's encoded and created through all the kinds of creative decisions that are made to produce TV. This gets us to the idea of staging, right? Staging is going to be our term for all the various decisions that go into deciding what's going to appear on screen to convey what happens and what it means. How are we going to stage TV, in other words? It can have to do with what are really theatrical elements, as if this were an actual stage play. The sets, the props that are used, the way that the lighting is positioned, the costumes that characters wear, the way that they're made up, the way actors move. In other words, all those things that exist in theater, not just film or TV. Those are meaningful in terms of staging a story. Then there are also what we'll call the filmic elements of staging, such as framing. In theater, we can see everything in our field of view. In film or television, there's a limit to the frame. There's a size, there's a proportion, and there's things inside and outside of the frame. Staging refers to that. Where do we point the camera? How much can we see in it? And the other thing, camera movement. How does the camera move amongst what's going on? What is its relationship to those actors on screen? So when we examine staging, we're thinking about the way that the camera shows us things, but also what's there in front of the camera, right? The theatrical and the filmic. Another element of staging that we can think about is the notion of space and TV space. So in terms of staging of a scene, there are two different types of television space. There's the camera space, and that refers to the horizontal field of view. How much do we see in front of the camera? Is it a wide shot? Is it a medium shot? Is it a close-up? But then also camera proximity. Where is that camera related to the characters or the actors that are on stage? So the camera moves and has its own space, just like actors do, right? And that's our other type of TV space, the performer space. The performer blocking, which usually is along axes. If you think about, if you're looking at a scene, you have the x-axis where performers walk back and forth, and you have depth, the z-axis. You don't have a y because most people can't levitate in the air and float, right? But we do have x and z.